Let's start by talking about Nightreign's ending. In this cutscene, the night appears to end before it even begins. A giant of the night is bestowed grace and gazes towards the lands between, only to turn away, walking silently into the dawn instead. This ending will make more sense by the end of the video, but I bring it up now because I think this moment reflects what Night as a title was trying to achieve. Namely, that Nightreign doesn't intend to intrude upon the lands between. Delve into the lore, and you'll be able to detect this careful restraint from the writers, a reluctance to disrupt the canon of the base game. And yet, Nightreign still achieves a broadening of the world of Elden Ring. It introduces us to new peoples, and places outside the lands between. And it even recontextualizes elements from the base game, like the Eternal Cities, which we now learn were banished underground in a single night. On top of that, Nightreign just has its own fascinating lore, largely contained within its own universe, and I think the lore is a great achievement by director Ishizaki and the team. I can't wait to talk about it. From a variety of interviews with the director, we learn that Nightreign occupies a separate branching timeline that diverges after the events of the Shattering in Elden Ring. It is an alternate what-if scenario in the lands between. In other words, this is a separate dimension, a reality where the night actually managed to take root. But what is the night? My answer might surprise you. You'll recall the Nox from the base story of Elden Ring, a race that foresaw an age of stars and a lord of night. And so they waited, deep underground, in eternal anticipation. I find that this aligns well with director Ishizaki's definition of the night. In an interview with IGN, he refers to the night as a sort of natural disaster, a cataclysm that didn't come about from design or intent, rather it simply happened. Indeed, the Nox waited, as if their night would inevitably follow the day. But they would wait eternally. For so much of Elden Ring's story is about the suppression of natural forces, like death, rot, and fire. Aspects thrown out of by the fickle nature of gods and men, all in pursuit of order. Take rot, for example. In the Shadow of the Ord Tree DLC, a big theme was that rot was once more of a positive accepted force in the world, and only when it was sealed away and vilified did it turn baleful. So I suspect something similar is happening now, with the natural calamity of Nightreign. That the night has been suppressed by the Golden Order for far too long, and that here, at last, it encroaches upon the day in a baleful tide. But what does the night represent, and how might Marika's Golden Order have suppressed it? To start, the night is clearly tied to darkness, something long denied by the Ord Tree, whose light never dims, holding true darkness at bay. The night is also tied to fate, something able to be read in the stars of the night sky. But have you ever noticed how difficult it is to see the stars, if there's a bright light nearby? I imagine the Ord Tree can't have helped with that. Indeed, the fate held in the night sky is said to have been fettered by the Golden Order. And finally, as we learn in Nightreign, the night represents equanimity. It comes to all equally. That sets it apart from the Golden Order, which governs with selective grace, bestowing it upon some, and withholding it from others. So naturally, there is a tension that has developed between the night and the Golden Order. One need only listen to the mutterings of the Albinaurics to know that. So it is that I believe the Night Lord is a calamity brought about by grace. A natural reckoning, long overdue. But I suspect the truth runs even deeper. Defeat a Night Lord, and you'll receive the Trace of Night. Its description reads, the light dimly reveals the contours of a greater being that lies beyond the Night Lord. This Trace of Night leads us to the final boss eventually, but we don't see them in this icon. What we're looking at is clearly cosmic, something greater. And this might be controversial, but I theorize that what we're seeing are the contours of an outer god of the night. In previous videos, we've talked about how many of the outer gods do seem to embody natural forces. In that way, they are rooted in the world, though they still remain cosmic and unknowable in nature as well. And speaking of cosmic entities, on the second day of your expedition, you might have spied this dead Erd tree in the distance, which glows white, then eventually makes contact with something swirling in the sky at night. And on the third day, the tree actually appears to split open, forming the shape of a chalice, as cosmic light swells downward from the heavens. In other endings of the base game, the Erd tree itself changes color and form as these new orders take root. So the idea that an Erd tree is potentially being co-opted by the night here feels like a really fitting theory to me. I'm getting pretty unhinged on this topic, but I'll keep going. I think this white light could literally be the outer god of night, manifesting. We do see a light within the trace of night. We know the Nightfarers are opposed to this light based on how they face off against it in this scene. Plus, I'm not gonna lie, these openings in the light, they give me moon presence vibes. That's definitely playing a part in my interpretation here. And these holes kind of bear a resemblance to the perforated bone-like stone, another very Bloodborne-esque relic that the recluse's remembrances will leave you with. This stone was bestowed upon the menial by the Night Lord himself, and it's described as the bone of an outer god, with the power to expunge divine essence, but that can also be destroyed by that same essence. So while it's possible it's the bone of some other outer god, I personally think it's a bone-like stone of the night. For just like the stone, the night has the power to snuff out grace, while also being weak to holy damage. In short, both the stone and the night can expunge divine essence, but can also be destroyed by that same essence. I'll discuss these speculative points more in future videos, and even offer corrections if I change my mind on this. But for now, I quite like this theory. And even if you don't agree that the night is technically an outer god, I think we can all agree that there is some aspect of the night beyond the final boss, for he didn't cultivate this power of the night on his own. It wasn't born of him, it came to him, in the dead of night. The primordial Night Lord's rune. This is the primordial Night Lord's rune, a thing possessing the same nature as a great rune. It's interesting that they never explicitly call it a great rune of the Elden Ring, and while we could speculate on why that is, for now I think it's simply enough to say this. This rune of the coming night is clearly connected to the Elden Ring's order of the world, but for whatever reason, it no longer seems to be a part of it now. Maybe this rune was removed from the Elden Ring, perhaps it was always a separate thing to the Elden Ring, or maybe it broke away with the shattering. The shattering, we learn that during this world-breaking event, Elden Ring's timeline itself split, giving rise to a new dimension. And while I suspect that the division happened in the instant when the Elden Ring was shattered, the shattering refers to more than just that single event. It also encompasses the wars that followed, when the demigods, each bearing a great rune, waged war across the lands between. It was this war, we're told, that eventually drew forth the Night Lord. And so, amidst the chaos of the shattering, I think there might have been one battle that was particularly fateful. The country lay in ruin. The man who once was a knight had challenged the hero, but he too was no match. He fell, just another body in a great pile, but eventually he awoke, crawling out from underneath the others. Though he had failed to protect anything or anyone, he yet lived. And so he cursed the world. It was the dead of night, and from the sky poured down a great rain. Thus did a nameless man become the primordial Night Lord. That's actually what his name is in the Japanese version. Na-Mades. Nameless. It's tempting to speculate about the identities of this unnamed man and the hero he faced. But I don't think that's the point of Nightreign's story. I believe they were left nameless on purpose. That said, the Night Lord does have a name in the English. His name is Healster, an Old English word that means darkness or concealment. Though it's not the name of who he was, rather it's the name of the Night Lord he would come to be. This transformation happened as he crawled out from beneath a great pile of bodies, imagery which calls to mind a certain divine gate, or perhaps the Jarson's conglomerations of bodies that allow one to touch the divine via the crucible. And clearly this nameless ex-knight touched something divine, for he came to harbor the primordial Night Lord's rune within, not unlike how Marika harbors the Elden Ring. The word primordial here means original, ancient. Indeed, Healster is the first Night Lord. But he was not the only Night Lord. Over time, his night would spread. The reach of the night is limitless, its potential immeasurable, its touch indiscriminate, affecting any and all things. And so its touch changed the fates of many powerful beings. And while many feared the night, some welcomed it, like Gladius, who became the Beast of Night. The Night of the Beast relic reads, the wolf pup, born with its 3 heads, was feared by its peers and driven out of the pack, but its will to live was strong indeed. Upon a rain-swept night, it seized a man's sword with its great jaws, but he showed no fear. He did not seek to harm the wolf, but instead took it in his arms. It has remained at his side ever since, always carrying that very sword. I think the man who cradled Gladius on this rain-swept night was obviously Healster, who recognized this beast's ability to struggle against its fate. And in this way, Healster spread to other Night Lords. In a way, they are all the Night Lord, for every one of them possesses a piece of his night, a fateful place that we visit on the third day, when precious little remains. In this dimension, the Oak Tree is long gone, and Limgrave has become the final frontier, distorted here by the Knight's power over fate. And the Knight's touch has put it at risk of disappearing entirely. The story of each Nightfarer explains why they're able and willing to resist the Knight, and it's these stories that we'll detail in other videos. These characters are all very interesting and diverse, but while they all hail from different countries and different eras and walks of life, here, the Nightfarers are condemned, each and all, by the ancients of the past, a group of people who saw the night coming and prepared for the first nightfall. Such was their fate. We lie the condemned of the first nightfall, whose sin is too great for absolution by our own deeds. Thus we shall ever guide our progeny, until the night breaks. So reads a passage on the underground crypt at the heart of the Round Table, which itself contains more words from these condemned, those who would elect to become the foundation. In this crypt, there are 8 coffins, a number that calls to mind our 8 Nightfarers. Indeed, the ancients of the crypts might have had a lot in common with our characters. They might have even once fought against the primordial Night Lord as well. Remember, Healster is restrained in Phase 1 when we fight him. A dagger and greatsword are thrust into him, and a flowing incantation seals him. Clearly, there has been conflict with him before. In the Recluse's questline, the menial reveals that he knows about the incantation that seals the Night Lord. He's also very familiar with the ancient people of the crypt. It appears you have unearthed some old history. Yes, the crypt is filled with the ancient people of these lands. I still remember looking after them long, long ago. As you know, mortality does not apply to those such as myself. These souls were laid to rest here in anticipation of the threat we now face, in a ritual required to draw the minds of their descendants here. So, these ancient people were put to rest as a part of a ritual which would draw our Nightfarers to this place to prevent the night. And speaking of preventing the night, the primordial Night Lord's rune reads, personally, I believe that the people buried in the crypt belong to the cutting-gifted tribe, either that, or they were an ancient people who inherited the cutting-gifted tribe's burden. Either way, so much of Nightreign's lore begins and ends with the tribe, a group of people who glimpsed what they should not, the very sin of the Erd Tree. Given this text appears on the primordial Night Lord's rune, I suspect the tribe's foresight had something to do with the rune itself. Did they discover that this rune existed, and that the night was thus inevitable? I guess it's impossible to say for sure how they knew, but the how is largely irrelevant, for they were punished simply because they saw the night coming, and in the eyes of power, truth can often be the greatest transgression. Such unfair treatment is nothing new in Elden Ring lore. The prophets, too, who foresaw the burning of the Erd Tree, were similarly punished for their foresight, persecuted, driven from their homes, and forced to wear shackles as a warning to passers-by not to lend an ear to their sermons. I want to talk a little bit more about these prophets from the base game, because I think there's some great parallels to be drawn between them and the cutting-gifted tribe. From the fire's deadly sin description, you'll note that the prophet despaired at their own prophecy about the Erd Tree burning. This reveals that they were loyal to the Erd Tree, and didn't want to see it fall. The same goes for the cutting-gifted tribe. They too fought to preserve the Erd Tree against the night, despite its sin. Indeed, if we assume that the cross-legged man at the end of the game is of the cutting-gifted tribe, then it's clear from his garb that he's a commoner of the lands between, and from the commoner's simple garb, we learn that the commoners traditionally engaged in their own voluntary displays of allegiance to the Erd Tree, one of which, it seems, was to destroy the primordial Night Lord's room. So, just like the prophets, the tribe remained faithful. Yet, the cutting-gifted tribe was not simply punished with exile. They were subjected to a fate far more severe. Not exile, not death. Rather, a duty. To stop the onset of night. The very thing that they had prophesied. To atone for the first sin. This was the punishment imposed upon the clan for glimpsing the sin of the Erd Tree. There's the line, their only chance at success was to cheat a god, and that's a line that I interpret as a desperate effort to outwit the outer god of night, and thus cheat the being out of its rightful claim to the night itself. But who are the cutting-gifted tribe, really? Well, it's right there in the name. The word cutting here isn't a violent one. It's horticultural. That can be confirmed by the equivalent word that's used in the Japanese description of the same item, which is sashiki, a similarly horticultural term. Horticulture is the art of growing plants, and Elden Ring lore commonly makes really poetic use of horticultural terms like grafting, and scion, and buds, and offshoots, and branches when describing bloodlines. Elden Ring's significant bloodlines revolve around a tree, after all, so such double meanings are beautifully poetic in this context. Of these terms, the word grafting has so far been the one that's the most important in Elden Ring, lore-wise. Grafting is a technique whereby the tissues from one plant are joined with another, so that they might grow together and become a single, stronger plant. You would have first heard about grafting from Godric's grafting of limbs. He is of Marika's bloodline, and her people famously have flesh that is easily grafted together. But a cutting is distinct from grafting. A cutting is a piece of plant, usually a stem, leaf, or root, that is cut from a parent plant and then planted in soil or water to grow a new, genetically identical plant. Both techniques are used for plant propagation, but where a grafting is a combination of two plants, a cutting is a clone of the parent. So where Godric sought strength through fusion, the cutting-gifted tribe pursued renewal through division. Thus, the cutting-gifted tribe are a clan that were gifted a cutting of a tree so significant, it became the very heart of their tribe's identity, clearly. The only other item to mention the cutting-gifted tribe is this, the cord end, easily the rarest item you can find in Limbold. With a drop rate of just 0.035%, the cord end can only be found in the boxes inside churches. It leads to a cave that, from a gameplay perspective, holds little value. But for the lore hunter, it means everything. So yes, the circle is closing in, and yeah, you should probably help your team kill that boss over there. But read the cord end's detailed description, and you'll learn. This carefully woven cord belonged to the young girls who were housed in a place that was meant as an eternal secret, and that the cutting-gifted tribe vowed to sacrifice their flesh while concealing the truth. But the girls were too young to oblige. It's not clear whether this line means that the girls were too young to oblige to sacrificing their flesh, or whether they were too young to oblige to concealing the truth. Personally though, I think it's the latter. Because somehow, one of them left this cord end behind in a church. A clue and a key that leads us to the place that was meant as an eternal secret. A door in the ravine that can only be opened by the one clutching the cord end. Here in this curious, sorrowful cave, I think we find the origin of the cord end. I believe it's the frayed end of this girl's hand restraints. Twisted bindings that keep her hands together in prayer. That said, you might choose to believe that the cord end is something else, and that's totally valid. I'm not trying to say that my theory is the right one. I'm not even convinced that it is. The cord end is a really bizarre item, visually especially. It looks like a silver umbilical cord, just as much as it does a severed binding. But for the sake of having a story to tell here, for now, I choose to believe that this cord end is the end of the girl's hand bindings. Something intentionally severed and left behind in a church in a quiet act of rebellion. Something left behind to lead us to a place that was meant as an eternal secret. A cave, where we find evidence of the girl's sacrifice. And while only one girl is found at the end of the cave contains other signs of that sacrifice. 3 sacrificial twigs, which you might recognize from the base game of Elden Ring. They're talismans that are consumed instead of rune loss on death. They're fashioned from a dried twig, so slender that it might snap at the slightest touch, and they are believed to be a twig pruned from the Erd tree long ago. Now, we could go down the path of speculating on exactly how these sacrificial twigs might have been used or created from the sacrificial ritual, but what's far more relevant, I think, is to discuss the fact that these twigs were pruned from the Erd tree long ago. It's a line that I think points the finger at the Erd tree for this ritual sacrifice of these young girls. Remember also, the cord end is exclusively found in churches of the Erd tree. Plus, the cutting-gifted tribe were tasked by the Erd tree to fight against the Night. Yes, they were the ones who vowed to sacrifice the flesh in pursuit of this goal, but clearly the Erd tree is implicated here as well. So naturally, it makes the most sense that the cuttings gifted to the tribe were cuttings of the Erd tree. Roots, stems, most likely branches, used to grow a new tree, a clone of the original. The cuttings in question might have even been these sacrificial twigs pruned from the Erd tree. However, given that all the grafted and scions and buds mentioned in Elden Ring are people, what if the cuttings gifted to the tribe were people as well? What if they were the young girls that were sacrificed? Cuttings of Marika, sacrificed to grow a new tree. Think about it, the idea of there being people at the heart of great trees is nothing new. If anything, it's an essential part of these great trees. Indeed, Mikola watered the Hylig tree with his own blood, and embedded himself within it. The Erd tree's roots absorbed the corpses of the dead. Cut content even mentions Miranda of the Flower Crucible, who is clearly a woman merged with a plant. So we can only speculate on this topic, but I think this girl, surrounded by dried branches, white with age, became, or created, this. A divine, dried, white spirit tree, grown to defy the night. This tree coiled around a divine tower is what we fight beneath at day's end. It's the last bastion of resistance, a tiny circle that the night tries to overpower, only to be forced back entirely, if the Nightfarers are victorious. And at the end of the second night, the tree beckons them upwards into the white tower itself, which is called the Spirit Shelter, or in the Japanese, the Sacred Tree. The Sacred Tree itself is a spiritual place. Unlike the other great trees, it isn't rooted to this world physically, so it appears where it's most needed. The fact that this is a spirit tree is very fitting, especially if the theory is true that the girl was sacrificed to create it, for she too has passed on. And speaking of this girl, the upper branches of the sacred tree actually culminate in two tree-like hands, but unlike those seen in the spiral tree seal from the DLC, I think it was well known amongst certain groups that there was a powerful human element to creating these towering trees. It's here in this refuge that the Nightfarers wait out the third day in safety, preparing to face the Night Lord, because when the third night falls, so will the land. And all of this just screams Marika to me. It would be so like her to have one of these schemes in place in advance, to condemn the ancients as she condemned the tarnished, only to invite them back when the time is right, to her roundtable hold. This place, far removed from the world, with its state and power originating from the Erd tree. What's more, here in the roundtable script, we find two inscriptions that speak of the ways of cutting, referred to in Japanese as the guidance of cutting. So I think that just as Marika once did, bestowing cuttings to the tribe, it seems they too would follow her example. The crypts reveal that they began to bestow branches of their own, sending cuttings to distant lands. Now, there is cut content from version 1.0 of Nightreign that mentions a literal golden branch that is bestowed to the recluse, and it's this branch that draws her to Limfeld. So it's possible, maybe even likely, that the branches they speak of were literal branches that draw the Nightfarers from distant lands. But rather than these being literal branches, again, as with the cuttings, what if these branches bestowed to distant lands were people? I have a theory that the branches were the progeny of the cutting-gifted tribe, who would become the Nightfarers, a bloodline that was sent out to branch among many. Remember, the inscription here reads, "We shall ever guide our progeny until the night breaks." The menial mentions their descendants being drawn here. So is it possible that the ancients might have planted their progeny among many different folk, bestowing branches, so to speak? This could explain why the Nightfarers come from such diverse lands, while stemming from those same ancestors. Indeed, these ways of cutting mention other lands and other peoples. One coffin reads, "The ways of cutting point to Windwale Null, bestow branches to those who wander in Rome." Wilder and Duchess's adoptive clan are those who wander in Rome. The next inscription reads, "The ways of cutting point to the deep woods, bestow branches to those who are worthy and wise." Those are the recluse's people. But whether it was by some bloodline ritual or literal branches pointing the way, the Nightfarers made their way to Limbold, led by the ways of cutting. And the ancients chose well when deciding who to guide here, all thanks to the guidance of the guidance of cutting. "Hark, warriors," they wrote, "fell the Lord, and thy sins absolve. Upon the breaking of the night the hold shall crumble, and thou too shall be unbound." And so the Roundtable once again becomes this refuge out of time and space, a place the Nightfarers can return to between expeditions, a ship floating upon the flood of the night. Though this ship would need a captain, the Duchess is called back from her foster home, to become its priestess instead. According to the founders, the priestess is rooted to the Roundtable, and must share its fate. But this topic is perhaps better suited for an upcoming video on the Duchess and her lore. But here, I do want to talk about one important thing related to her, and that's the formless master that she serves. Ask her, what does our formless master have to say? And she replies, the term formless definitely gives me outer god vibes, considering other formless beings in From Software's lore like Bloodborne's formless Erden, and Elden Ring's formless mother. That said, it seems unlike an outer god to speak through the priestess so literally. So personally, I tend to think that the formless master here might simply be the grace at the center of the hold, which the priestess is often enraptured by. Considering she's the one reciting the dialogue, I think it's more likely that she's interpreting grace itself, Marika. And just as Marika binds Hugh to the hold until he creates a weapon capable of slaying a god, the Nightfarers too abound here, until they defeat the Night Lord, at which moment the Roundtable hold will cease to exist. The priestess in particular is tied to the fate of the Roundtable, and while her fellow Nightfarers eventually escape in wisps of grace, she will cease to exist. But there's a loophole, a way to create a new knight, but allow the priestess to be freed. So reads a scrap of paper detailing the new knight, torn from its former binding. A message written by an ancient people, and the only ones who fit the bill of being an ancient people here are the ancients in the crypt. They write, the priestess is the very cornerstone of the Roundtable, indispensable. Should the Night Lord fall, the Roundtable too will crumble, as their fates are together bound. Yet, should the Roundtable be remade, perhaps the priestess may be emancipated from her bindings. This might be done upon the falling of the new night, should the Lord's power be lost, and if so. So it seems the ancients had theorized about a way to sort of fight back against the priestess's unjust fate. Because how fair is it really that their progeny should be responsible for vanquishing the night, let alone fated to perish along with it? Yes, they all have personal reasons for wanting to vanquish the night. They even have their own sins in a way that are tied to the night. But at the end of the day, it's the Ode Tree's sin, not theirs. But wait, what really is the Ode Tree's sin in the end? Well, the original sin is a plot point that From Software love to reuse. A moment of extreme sin that is never explained, and only ever alluded to, but that clearly is responsible for all the calamity that we see in these games. In both Dark Souls and Elden Ring, we're shown the fickle nature of the gods, their unstable ideologies, their pride and their fear, making them no different than men. It's these very traits that drive them to suppress what they fear most. So, just as Gwyn suppressed the dark, and Marika suppressed death, and so much more, I think there was also a suppression of the night. I think this suppression is the original sin. What do you think? In being silenced, I believe the night has grown into a force opposed to grace and everything it stands for. And where grace would visit warmth upon the few, the night would come to all, indiscriminately. In Limbold's final days, the night's encroachment is heralded by tree-like titans that set off from this land. The night seems inevitable, and yet, the Nightfarers are victorious in the end. They rise from the Roundtable hold as wisps of grace, free at last. So it is that in the main ending, we don't see the night falling upon the lands between. No, instead, we witness grace reaching out to the night. It reminds me of this moment at the end of the Recluser's questline. The song that plays during this scene is Dawn, and, thanks to the grace of the Nightfarers, the night ends, as if it simply never was. Thank you for watching. If you're still listening, thank you, and here's a special code just for you that I'll share for everyone who made it to the end. It gives you a discount on any of these 4 mugs, which I've just uploaded to the store for the first time. These are inspired by Elden Ring, Sekiro, Bloodborne, and Dark Souls, and they're probably my favorite of all the merch that I've honestly made. Previously, these mugs were Patreon exclusive, but now, there's a new round of Patreon exclusive mugs for anyone who signs up to the Soul of a Great Mug Collector tier. Every 3 months for a year, you'll receive a new exclusive mug in addition to many other Patreon rewards, like early access to videos, and the wallpaper collection. So check out the Patreon if you're interested in supporting and getting something in return, and thank you again for watching. And before I forget, let's quickly run through all of the deep lore reasons that the Nameless King is in Elden Ring. So,